Hello, my name is Pim Huijnen, and I'm a historian from Utrecht University. I'm here with you today to talk about the article Something Happened to the Future that I wrote together with my colleague Joris van Eijnatten. To our big but very pleasant surprise, the jury of the Richard Deswarte Prize for Digital History deemed it fit to award the first edition of this prize to our article. Now, in this talk, I will say something about it, about how it came about and what we tried to achieve with this article. Joris, unfortunately, could not be here today, so I will represent the both of us. Let me then start with saying for us both how deeply honored, humbled, and proud we are to receive this prize. We have had our reasons to study this particular topic and approach it in the way we did. And I will elaborate in a second on what I mean by this, but it is not guaranteed that such an approach is recognized or appreciated. So we see the prize as a recognition that the jury did, which obviously makes us very happy. One of our principles was to do this research together. This is, as you know, not as obvious in historical scholarship as I, for one, wish it would be. In digital history, however, we, yours and I, believe it is not only preferable to work together, but often simply indispensable. It would be quite extraordinary for one scholar to have the domain knowledge, the methodological expertise, and the technical skills that most digital history studies need. Joris and I found ourselves through our mutual interest in conceptual history and our shared philosophy of how to use digital methods in historical research. What I mean by that is that Joris and I both consider ourselves historians in the first place. From the start, we aim to study above all a historically relevant question, as opposed to, for example, a technically relevant question. A field of study so neatly placed between the computational and the historical often forces scholars to make a choice between the two. Do I want to say something about new methodologies or techniques, or do I want to say something about history? You may be familiar with this dilemma. Sometimes the choice for either is a negative one. Lack of computational skills might make it difficult to develop new techniques, while lack of representative data, for example, may make it impossible to surpass the proof of concept level. Well, we in this study wanted to make a positive choice and, like I said, emphatically opted for the historical relevance. We believe, and this is our second principle, we believe this is the way forward for digital history. Its relevance is dependent on us showing how digital approaches can contribute to relevant existing questions and debates, which is, I hope and presume, in the spirit of the name giver of the prize we've been awarded. The question we aim to answer in our study is how the future has been conceptualized in Dutch parliamentary debates over the last 200 years. The experience of time is a topical object of research, not in the least because climate change and notions like the Anthropocene force us to rethink current-day temporal focus points. One small but significant example, our Dutch Prime Minister is famous for his self-declared lack of vision. He sees himself as a problem solver, and he is proud of that, not as a visionary. And although, yeah, I don't know, there might have been times when that was enough for a leader to be, it now, above all, demonstrates how hopelessly out of sync he is with what our time needs. To get slightly political here. And well, I assume Joris will agree, but since he's not here, I can say really what I want. This example is actually quite illustrative of the study we did. The theoretical background to our research is exactly this disappearance of an envisioned future during the 1970s and 1980s that theorists like François Hartog and Aleida Assmann have identified with Hartog's notion of the time regime of the present, for example. To us, it seemed relevant to study this hypothesis for the Netherlands, but also to study it in a quantitative manner. Why? Well, because quantitative techniques offer really interesting novel approaches to the study of time. I had already noticed this years ago when I fooled around with an engram viewer built on the magnificent Dutch historical newspaper corpus and visualized on a time scale, as you can see here, the relative frequency of each year in numbers between 1900 and 1990. What I saw when I did that is actually, it seems the opposite of Hartog's contention that societies focus more and more on an ever smaller present. Years in Dutch newspapers have an increasingly longer half-time when comparing the start with the end of the 20th century. As you can see here by these horizontal lines in the lower figure here. Another example, for a paper presented at DH 2022 this year, I've studied the way Dutch newspapers refer to the past by means of the phrase "n years ago," where n stands for actual years, right? 1, 2, 3, 10, 100. It's a very simple question, but it's super difficult to research manually. What I did was first I've listed the most frequently used years that are used in this particular phrase during the 20th century. Second, I've plotted their trends, as you can see in this graph. And third, I've checked to which particular years newspapers most frequently refer when they use this phrase. In the case of our article that I'm talking about here, Something Happened to the Future, we did a conceptual history of the concept future. Computational techniques are extremely suited to study concepts because different techniques are able to capture different elements of what we actually mean when we say or when we talk about meaning, as in what does the future mean for politicians. Well, you can, for example, use a frequency, which can say something about popularity. Engrams tell us something about the context in which a word is used. And word embeddings can say something about the semantics of a word. These are also more or less the techniques we used to show how the notion of the future changed in Dutch Parliament from around, as we identified it, around the 1970s and 80s. We started out by simply calculating frequencies over time of future as a noun and an adjective. And we noticed that the future has always been present in political speech, and if anything, its use only increased, its use as a separate noun, I should say, only increased towards the end of the 20th century and the start of the 21st. Nevertheless, the future at the end of the century did differ from that 100 years earlier. And what we noticed was that things started changing around, like I said, the 1970s and 80s. Through engram generation, we looked at, for example, what we call productivity, the different connections made with future. So the different phrases that future is used in, and we noticed a significant rise of the productivity during the post-war decades, as you can see in the graph here on the right. What we noticed is how a general idea of the future made way for multiple smaller and more concrete futures of. Now, a constant throughout the 20th century is that even politicians dare to admit that the future is unknown. But what we also found was what changes around the 1970s and 80s is the general sense that the future is, in principle, predictable, in line with the theory of a reflexive modernity by theorists like Giddens and Beck. Words like planning, prognosis, and development make way for the much more open scenario and change and a general sense of unpredictability. We've always tried to substantiate our claims with extensive checking of the actual sources, and we have added so many quotes from our sources, as you can see in this slide, because they are so typical. But also as a way of arguing, how else should readers believe our interpretations? To conclude, we have seen the future not completely disappearing, but rather changing into something fundamentally unpredictable and often worrisome. As a result, politicians try to make the future small, no grand ideal, but a practical vision, things that we can grasp and fix today. You can see it, for example, in this quotation here on the left below. What is needed is not a utopia or social dream, but a vision. And with vision, I mean to have something inside. Or in this quote from 2011 here below, the future is what one has when one puts one's affairs in order in the present. I think very illustrative for the political mentality today. And yeah, it's probably true that each country gets the politics it deserves, but I wonder whether this mentality is the most productive philosophy to approach the questions of our time. Well, that's not a question that we have an answer to in our article, so that's a thought I'm gonna leave you with for now. I'm very much looking forward to discussing our paper with you, and for now I say all the best and goodbye.